Brian Spracklen. How are you?
Good. How's it going today?
Good. How's the last name? Where does it come from?
It's actually Welsh.
Welsh.
Yeah. So, which there's a little bit of dispute on that. My family came from England back in the 17th century.
Wow.
And part of the family believes that they came from, they originated in Wales. Another faction of the family thinks that it was actually in the southwest part of England, in more in the Cornish area. Huh. It's in Cornwall.
Have you been to either of those places?
I have. Yeah? I have. I haven't spent enough time in either one of them. And you know, going back, 20 years ago or so, from an uncle, I got a pretty extensive family tree.
Really?
And he had put some of it together over a few years after he retired. He, dove into that and started working on it. But interestingly, a lot of his information that he got came from a couple of decades prior to that. Well, I shouldn't just say a couple. I think about 40 years earlier, there were some long lost aunts of mine, somewhere along the way that went over to England to really follow the family tree and see, where everybody was coming from, get some more information that kind of filled in where the genealogy left off. And during the time, as the story goes, during that trip, they were sending regular updates via letter home, back to where they were from, to their sisters. And one day the letters stopped, the aunts came home, and they never talked about it. So really? Nobody to this day knows what kind of information they found, and they
and this was in the 1900s?
Well, they went over, this was probably in the 30s or 40s.
Wow.
That they went over to trace this back. So a lot of the information that he was compiling came from where they left off.
Wow.
And he was somehow able to get that information, I think, probably from his mom, who was a niece of theirs. So, and of course, as you know, back in the 30s and 40s was a much different world. So, what they probably thought was completely scandalous, in our day and age, we probably would think, what's the big deal?
Yeah, it was all hidden then.
It was all hidden. So,
wow.
Yeah, to this day, nobody knows about that. But circling back to the original thought, I used to travel to England about every 5 or 6 weeks for work.
Wow.
And I'd spend a good week to 10 days in Europe, depending on where I needed to go for what my trip needed. And I'd always have 2 or 3 days of downtime, especially if I was there over a weekend. So I kept thinking that I would bring that genealogy along and go to wherever, I needed to go, where there were some black parts of that, and see if I could fill in some
Find
gaps.
out where the footsteps stopped.
Yeah, exactly. And every time I went, I'd forget to put because I have all this. It's none of it's on computer. It's all, a thick file of paper that he had passed on to me several years back.
Wow.
And I always forgot it. And now I'm not, traveling there very often. And so
did you say your family came here as early as the 1700s?
Yeah, the 17th century. So
17th
actually it was
century.
the late 1600s is when the first Spracklen came over. And they spelled it a little bit differently then. And there are variations. Interestingly, just over the years, most of the Spracklen progeny have been females. So, it's not one of those names that's matriculated throughout time, particularly considering how long we've been here. An example is my great-grandfather. His father settled in Wyoming, which was kind of where my family sprouted up from.
Did he have a cool name like Jebediah?
It was
something?
Clement. Clement. Yeah. Clement Spracklen.
Was he the sheriff?
he the Sheriff Clem. He had a general store.
Oh, great.
And it was called Clem's Racket.
Oh man.
So, or something to that effect. It was, the racket, but it was a general store. And, funny little side note, about that. About a year ago, my mom was doing some kind of, Google search. I think it was for my wife's webpage and, for her business. And she came across this, eBay, listing for a little plate that was, probably a good 100 years old, little tea plate. And on the back, it said, Clem Spracklen, Sheridan, Wyoming.
Oh my gosh.
And they only wanted on eBay, they only wanted like $10 for it or something. So she bought it and had it sent to me. And now I've got this little plate, and, asking my family members about it, they said that that's probably where it came from. Was, he had, it was a general store, literally had everything in there. And in the one photo that we still have of him in his store, you can see where toward the front of the store, there's a big section, with china and, all sorts of porcelain, service plates.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to get something and think about the possibility or the likelihood that, my great-great-grandfather had touched this and had it in his possession, over 100 years ago.
That's crazy. And, growing up in the New Jersey area, a lot of the people I knew, they had grandparents or, at the latest, great-grandparents who came over.
Right.
So it was sort of a very recent group of people, generally speaking. How the heck, how did your family, or your, way back when, what led them from England into the 1600s? And it was all out to the west?
They all, I think if I remember right, the original group, was here on the East Coast, and then migrated and sat, I think, in Illinois. I think it was either Illinois or Michigan. Pretty sure it was Illinois for, I don't know, 50, 60 years.
Wow.
And then there was quite a big Spracklen contingency there in Illinois. And then it kind of spread out from there. Clem and his wife moved out to Wyoming. And, as I was starting to say, they had 9 kids, 8 of which were daughters.
Wow.
So my great-grandfather, Leonard, was the only son in that entire litter.
Wow.
So,
and have they all stayed up in that area?
No. Over the years, everybody's kind of branched out a little bit. We still have a couple of relatives in Wyoming, but, outside of that, everybody's migrated elsewhere. And
so you grew up in Montana, right?
I did, yeah.
So was that a direct, did you have a grandparent in Montana, or how did the Wyoming get to Montana?
Yeah, well, great question. So my mom and dad went to high school together in Wyoming, in Sheridan, Wyoming. So we had, our family was planted there until, really the 80s, the late 80s, and my grandparents finally left to go retire in a different they went and found some cool golf, retirement place in Arkansas to, spend a few years. But
sold by Eric Estrada or something?
Yeah, something to that effect. They got hooked in for sure. But my parents, my dad was in the military. My brother was born right when my parents were graduating high school, because that's kind of just how it was back in the 70s.
God, Wyoming in the 70s. What was that like? We think it's open spaces now.
Yeah, it was definitely open spaces.
I mean, from what you hear about them, because I think growing up in the East Coast where everything's so tightly clenched and, population density, I almost can't imagine. I mean, I've been out to the West and you can feel how open it is. But, like, what did your parents tell you about growing up in Wyoming in the 70s?
They spent a lot of time, my dad particularly spent a lot of time in the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And, our family had a cabin out in the mountains, and my grandparents, my grandpa did a lot of different things. He went to law school, but he was never a lawyer. He was in marketing. He was actually a radio man. He was a big sports announcer, and had a radio station in Sheridan for several years. In fact, he used to get to vote for the Heisman.
Really?
Yeah.
Was this University of Wyoming, or is this another school?
No, he was in Sheridan. In fact, they didn't have a college. He was one of the founders of Sheridan College, which is a community college at the time. Wow. He founded the Little League program and the midget football program there. He did a lot of things for the community. It's kind of fun to look back on pictures, you know. Sheridan has a lot of kind of interesting little tidbits and pieces of history within it. It was a big factor with the Trans-Pacific Railroad. They've had tons of visitors over the Queen of England has visited there. In fact, there's a photo that we have of my grandpa and the Queen back in the 80s. This is kind of a funny story. Back in the 80s, there was on MTV a contest for getting to have Prince come to your hometown and play a private concert. Wow. And the person that won it lived in Sheridan, Wyoming. And she was actually a gal that was, I think, in her late teens, early 20s, and she had some learning disabilities. And, here's this cowpoke town. Yeah. And all of a sudden, Prince and his entourage come in on their private jet. And all of a sudden, they turn this whole town, just completely on its side and totally purple. And everybody just loved him. He was such a gentleman. My grandparents both got to meet him. My grandma was having her hair done, and he came in to probably one of the only hair salons in town just to kind of get himself touched up before all the cameras and whatnot.
That is crazy. What year is that? Like the 80s?
I think it was 83 or 84, if I remember right. God. And
so you remember this?
I remember it. Yeah. Oh yeah, I remember it because I think I signed up to to try to win, and then for somebody so close to win it. But the grandparents said that he was just the nicest guy. He was extra special, attentive to the winner, and just couldn't have been nicer, and everybody in the entire town was just really impressed with him.
Well, I think it's a good lesson sometimes when people think they're growing up in the middle of nowhere, that they don't count. You're always close to something, and you're always close to, as you know, you probably get into your story in a bit, you're always close to going where you want to go and making something out of it and having a different frame of reference because you were from there.
Oh, no question about it.
No question about it. It's funny you bring up the small town thing. I went cross country right after my senior year in high school. It was like a college trip. Mm-hmm. I had already chosen where I was going, but I went along for the trip, and we stopped in a town called Hays, Kansas. And I remember we were there for the night, and we're going around. I think I might have had like my first 6-pack. And
now, who were you with? Were you with friends or family?
So I was with friends, and everyone well, everyone always thinks this part's weird, but the basketball coach was this single guy his whole life. He never did anything weird, but he was a single guy. He's the winningest, or was until recently maybe, he was the winningest high school basketball coach in Bergen County, New Jersey history.
Really?
High-level coach. I used to go to the basketball camp there when I was a little kid. Good guy. And he would do this trip every year. He loved to travel.
Right.
He didn't have a family, and so the kids and the basketball team would be his family, and he had this van you would travel in. And it all just sounds so sketchy, but it wasn't. And literally, you would just put up like $250 each, and you were covered on the whole trip.
Oh, wow.
And so I went along because it was just a cool thing. There was only 2 of the kids on the trip. There was 4 of us.
Right.
2 of the kids were, in the time where they could be looking at colleges. And then me and my buddy Matt, we went along because he was close to this coach, even though he didn't play basketball.
Right.
Don't know how that went, but it was an amazing trip. And you were exposed to so much new stuff. We had our own hotel room. He had his own hotel room. So he was
so there
all that. There was nothing weird. But we were in this Hayes, Kansas, and we're kind of making fun of, from where we're from. We're close to the city. Oh, what's Hayes, Kansas? Blah, blah, blah.
Right.
A couple months later, a band at the time, very big band named American Hi-Fi, they shot a music video in a small home in a fan's house in Hayes, Kansas.
Oh, wow.
So these things, and that was always the thing, because we're like, oh, it's a
Right.
nondescript nothing town. There's no nothing town.
No,
I mean, you
there
find
isn't.
this when players ascend to the pro ranks, or whether they ascend to college, and it's always like, oh, he's from Valdosta, Georgia. He's from this
Right.
town. Everybody's from somewhere, and then when they make it, they put that place on the map, and now it's somewhere.
It's so true. If you've ever done any driving along especially the southern states, from say Texas through, I don't know, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, Georgia. If you've gone through any of the little small dinky towns, they always have, signs as you're coming into town that say home of. Yeah. And there's, always some, athlete particularly, or, interestingly in Kansas, a lot of astronauts come from Kansas and Iowa. And I've always wondered,
They're just looking up at the stars all day. There's no light driving it out.
I guess so. They're definitely doing that. And I also think that, especially in the Midwest, Midwesterners are known for just being really hard workers. And I think, when you grow up in that kind of an environment, you don't really have a choice but to be a really hard worker. You've got to learn to have your time kind of planned out well, and be able to execute your day in such a way that you can, do your farm chores in the morning, and
you're not going to hit on something that just makes you $1 million.
Right.
I'm thinking about it all the time.
Right.
You got to wake up every day at the same time, at the same rooster. Your kids got to work, and you're going to be a little better off each day than you were maybe the day before. I remember it was funny. Me and this friend would go on these trips all the time. I mean, we're 35 now, and he's already asking me about going to see USC, which is his favorite team, play at the University of Texas in September. He loves going on these trips.
Yeah.
But we went on one, I think the year after our freshman year of college, and we did a trip down through like West Virginia and the South and all that. And one of the things we wanted to do in West Virginia was go to the town of DuPont, which is, of course, in true West Virginia fashion, it's literally named after DuPont, because they just allow these corporations to just take over the land that much. But who's from DuPont? Jason Williams, the basketball player, White Chocolate, who would have all the crazy moves, and Randy Moss. So you got a town right there.
Yep.
And it was, you'd watch the old video of Jason Williams and Randy Moss on the fast break, and then I think Jason Williams was also the quarterback, maybe. So like everybody's from somewhere, and they make that place.
No question about it.
Now, when you think about the Wyoming aspect, because I'm so fascinated by the migration of people. So was it like the Trans-Pacific Railroad that got your family out there? Like, why do people at that point go to Wyoming? Was Wyoming no different than anywhere else in the West at that point?
Well, I mean, back during the time of the big migration to the West, they were literally there were these I can't remember the way that they referred to them, but it was essentially land grants. And what you'd have are these massive groups of people that would, the government would say, okay, we're giving away, sectors of land, sections of land on this day at this time. And you'll actually see this every now and again on Western movies, even particularly in the modern ones that talk about these land grabs. So you'd have all these people go out and they'd congregate and camp out waiting for, this giveaway.
It's like we wait for iPhones.
Right.
To buy them.
No, it's exactly how it was. And so on the day and the time, all of a sudden, you're given a stake, and the stake has it has a number on it. And I'm talking about not the steak you eat, but the steak you put
a stake in the ground.
Stake in the ground.
You could stab vampires with it.
Yes, exactly. And you, by this time, a lot of people have been able to scout out the area that they want. But just like with anything, there's prime real estate, and then there's just kind of your meh, and so everybody really wanted the prime, and it'd get ugly.
Yeah.
When they'd have these things, because you'd have 1,000 people out there and these families that had their big dreams of having their spread and their ranch. And
would they have to go to Wyoming for this?
Oh yeah,
grant?
Yeah. It's
camp out.
Yeah, it's all, you have to be there, because what happens is all of a sudden on the date and time they shoot off a starter pistol and everybody just runs.
Wow.
To where, to their plot of land that they want. And of course, as you can imagine, if two people are neck and neck and wanting the same plot of land, it got pretty ugly. And there was, it was the Wild West. That's where that all came from.
God. Yeah. we don't. It's funny. No matter how hard we think we work, we just don't work that hard. Because
no.
So you're camping out overnight to get a stake in the ground. And then, I often think, day one.
Right.
We got to build a house.
Got to build a house.
Oh my God.
Yep.
And then we got to figure out how we're going to make some kind of income from this period forward.
Yep.
I mean, that is just,
but that was
amazing.
part of this whole ecosystem that would happen with these migrations. It would take months to get from Jersey
right.
to to Wyoming or Oklahoma or any of these places where these were taking place. And it was a really rough travel, particularly if you had a whole family. It's one thing if you're just a lone cowboy on a horse, but if you came from, the metropolitan area, if you really want to call it that, but the city area of New York, New Jersey, Philly, you don't really have a lot of the resources to live off the fat of the land.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you're one guy and a horse going out there, it's still rough. But if you're taking your whole entire family out there, you're not ready for, the terrain. You're not ready for the challenges of food and water.
The weather. Because that's a part that's I don't know how people chose to live there. Did they know about the weather?
Crazy.
Did you see The Revenant?
Yeah.
It almost makes me think it's like that,
Exactly.
It's like, we're cold. All right, let's carve up an animal and live in it.
Yeah, exactly. It's insane. But the ecosystem of these situations were interesting, because you'd have people who were enterprising, and they knew that these folks were going to need wood
mm-hmm.
and nails, and you'd have these guys come out with essentially a wagon train full of stuff for a general store.
It's like a food truck. And then there would be outposts, right? Where you'd stop. And a lot of modern cities are built on those outposts, right?
Yep.
Crazy.
Exactly.
It's unbelievable.
Well, you look at places like Chicago and Kansas City, those cities were built on those outposts that became, they were big places where you'd bring in cattle, which in turn meant the railroads, wanted to hub in those places.
Right.
And so because they were railroad hubs, that's what really built those communities. And then of course, Chicago being right on the lake too,
Yeah.
you have that added piece for ships coming in and then taking everything west from the lakes on the railroad.
So how'd you end up in Montana from that point? It's
Montana.
one town, it's one state over, or?
Yeah, it's real close. Actually, I grew up, if you were to just draw a straight line, it was probably 30, 40 minutes to the border. So my parents, they grew up in Wyoming, went to high school together, had my brother. My dad enlisted, and this was during Vietnam. So, he was off doing that kind of stuff. My parents were stationed at a couple of different spots in, Biloxi, Mississippi, and then they were sent to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and that's where I was born.
Okay, so you were in Kentucky.
Yeah, while my dad was in the military. But then, that all de-escalated. He came home. Then he went to college on a GI Bill. So that's what took them to Montana. Was he went to Montana State University.
It's almost like the new form of the land grant.
Yeah,
in the military,
exactly.
Exactly. Montana State is not where Phil Jackson went, is it? He went to the University of Montana.
Yeah,
or was he South Dakota?
That's a good question. I thought I remembered him being University of Montana. He definitely wasn't Montana State.
So he was. Let's see. University of North Dakota. Sorry.
See,
does that drive people nuts when people mess up the places?
Oh, it doesn't.
It's all open.
It doesn't bother me. For a lot of people, it all kind of sounds the same. There have been some pretty famous alumnus out of Montana State, but Montana State is a really big engineering and mining and agriculture school. But a lot of brilliant minds end up there because they like that, kind of less. They like the lifestyle of being in the in the mountains, and there's so much to do around there from an outdoors standpoint. And you just don't have the hustle and bustle of the city life. There's always drawbacks and benefits no matter where you are, for sure.
And so your dad went to college there, and you grew up in that same town area.
Yeah. So we stayed there after he graduated, and we'd had. So I spent up until I ended up going to college there too, and then as soon as I'd had it with college, I was as far south as I could get. So I left, and I needed to go somewhere where there wasn't winter, there wasn't snow, I didn't have to shovel walks.
Now, what would your parents do to make ends meet living out there?
Well, my dad, he went to school in criminal justice.
Okay.
And he ended up being a sheriff.
Oh, that's fun.
And
that's elected, right?
He was a deputy, so he was, he was hired by
appointed.
Appointed. And my mom was a banker. And then, as with most similar situations from that era where you had kids right out of high school, they kind of found that they drifted apart after time. So they ended up separating, and he ended up going to work for the federal government in law enforcement. And after a few years, she remarried. I was still pretty young at this point, and she remarried a great guy who, they've been married now for 35 years, 36 years.
Wow.
And so they still live in Montana, my mom and stepdad, but he's retired now, and they travel quite a bit, and just kind of enjoying life. I'm pretty jealous, actually.
How big were your classes? Like, how many kids would be in classes? Was it just like a very small amount, or was there more than you'd think?
No, there's more than you'd think. And when I grew up in Montana, there were about 20,000 residents within the city, and then the university was about 12 or 13,000 students. So, it wasn't as if it was just a little tumbleweed town. It was actually, there were real
modern feeling.
Yeah. There were real hotels, and there were real grocery stores.
Wow.
And, it's not like we had to go plug our TVs into the current bush or anything.
What did a lot of the kids in your classes, like what were their parents' lines of work?
A lot of people worked at the university.
Okay.
There were a lot of, faculty from the university there, and then just like any town, you've got the folks that run, in retail.
Yeah,
and,
sure.
They do restaurants and real estate and all of the pieces around real estate. So back to your original question,
Yeah.
There were about 400 to 500 people in any given class back when I was there. So an actual class size would be anywhere from 20 to 30 kids, and
so rather small.
Yeah,
Oh wait, you mean
the classroom?
Actual that's pretty solid amount.
Is 20. Yes, it was totally normal. So yeah, we probably had one high school in our town. There were probably about 1,200 students in the high school at any given time.
Anybody famous when you were there? I mean, other than you?
Other than me?
Or who was the most famous person from your high school? Was that ever discussed?
I don't think it was ever really discussed.
Yeah.
There were a few kids that went off and played in the NFL.
Oh, okay. Linemen?
Couple linemen, linebackers. One guy, I was pretty oblivious to football players prior to my time there.
Yeah, sure.
But a guy that was a few years older than me, named Shane Collins, he did several years. I think he was in the NFL for 7 or 8 years.
It sounds like a football name.
Yeah. And another guy who just retired a couple of years ago, played for the Patriots. And what the heck? I can't believe I'm spacing his name now. Fletcher Collins, or no? No, his last name was Fletcher.
Oh, London Fletcher?
No, his first name was good grief. His dad actually is one of the
Dane
Fletcher. Yeah, Dane.
Thanks, Google.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, Dane had a pretty successful NFL career.
And he went to Montana State.
Yep. He was a Bobcat.
So Bozeman. Is that right near you? Or
that was my hometown.
Oh, that was your hometown.
Yeah.
What did I think? Oh no, I'm getting all my towns up there messed. Okay, so Bozeman. That's really like. Does it almost look like Boise? Like mountainous all around it, and like
real similar. It's right in the middle of a valley.
Yeah.
And huge mountains coming up on all sides. Real close to Yellowstone Park.
Okay.
And grew up in nature.
So do you find, because I find where I grew up here, that there's almost a feeling of, there's not like a wanderlust, like I have to get out of here. I mean, everybody has that feeling, but do you almost find that, one, I mean, from your family history of like the movement in this country, and then being in a place, Montana, I mean, it's not like you're growing up going, maybe I want to come here again at some other point, but man, I want to get out of here. Right?
Oh yeah. I mean,
did you find that with all the kids that you went to school with?
For the most part, some of the kids were, they were just brought up, they loved living on their ranch.
Yeah, sure.
They love that. That's, they just love that lifestyle.
Cowboy lifestyle a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
Pickup trucks.
A lot of people are scared to go out of their comfort zone. So, for a lot of those folks, I think they stuck around, haven't seen a whole lot of the, rest of the world. And that's, hey, cool for them. Most of my friends and most of my peers that I grew up with, we had to get out. We had to go see what else.
Was that because of technology? Did technology have a big point in seeing everything, or TV?
Well, TV.
Like, how'd you know where to go?
Definitely TV did. I think, I grew up with really smart people. Most of the kids that were in my high school, they're very, very smart.
Well, it's like a psychographic because it's sort of the college, not only college educated parents, a lot of them, but like people who teach in college is a whole different ball game.
For sure.
It's like its own country.
Yeah, no question about it. And that brought some really interesting, cultural variation. And so, we didn't have a ton of what, you would think would be rich diversity in culture.
Right.
But every year it seemed like, we'd have 2 or 3 new students that came from, Bangladesh or from Thailand or, some other place. And it was always really fun to get to know them and kind of better understand, what their culture was all about. And I think for the most part where we were, people were pretty interested in that.
Did it make going place to place easier? Because you've been to a lot of places, right?
Well, yeah. And I was also lucky enough to grow up in a family where we traveled a lot.
Yeah.
We traveled as a family. We'd go every year on some kind of spring break trip or, summer vacation. And so I was lucky enough to be able to experience a lot of different areas. And it probably made it, all the more of a big deal for me to get out and experience the world a little bit more.
Was it campers or was it like planes, or how far would you go being in Montana?
It really depended. It depended on how much time my parents had. And whether.
You had 2, right? Now you would have 2 vacations. There's 2 sets there.
Yeah.
Go on the better one.
Yeah. Sometimes we'd go to Mexico. Sometimes we'd go, we'd go to California, or we'd come over here to the east.
That was the best though, going to California, right? Like in the 80s.
Yeah, California was
like Shangri-La.
Cool. It was pretty cool because in Montana you just think that's and that's what you see on TV as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And so that was always a lot of fun. We'd sometimes go to Colorado or most of the time. I think to more succinctly answer your question, most of the time it was driving.
Yeah.
But every, probably once a year or once every 18 months, we'd fly somewhere that was, quite a distance. So there was always fun, fun stuff to see. But
so you said you didn't finish college at Montana State.
I left, I had to get somewhere warm, and
how did you choose where you were going?
Well, at the time, I was helping to coach a high school marketing team, and I was in college. I was in marketing and economics.
What does a marketing team do? How do you coach them?
Well, it's a high school team. I don't know if did you guys have DECA in your?
It sounds familiar.
So it's kind of like the Future Farmers of America, only it's more business oriented. And when I was in high school, I was the president of our DECA, our DECA club at school, and went to nationals, and I won on the state level, and then went to nationals and competed in nationals. So when I graduated high school, I was honored that the teacher sponsor of the club had asked me, if I'd come and help, coach and whatnot. So
what is competition like in that though? Is it like
it depends.
Plans, stock market?
Yeah, it can be. It can be. There are a lot of different facets. So, There's, retail, there's, finance, tons of different areas of business, and whatever, you're kind of interested in, is, what you tend to go toward. So,
do you know what marketing is yet?
Oh man. At 45, hell, I think it changes all the time. I know that, it's interesting that you asked that question, because I was thinking about this not too long ago, how it has changed so much. I was in college in the early 90s, and we didn't have the internet then. I mean, the closest thing to internet when I was in college was, I don't know if you remember Prodigy.
Yeah.
But it was more of a closed network.
Yeah.
And, it wasn't the same as what the internet is now.
Yeah.
And, just looking at how marketing was a lot different, back then. You're doing a lot more in terms of traditional, traditional campaigns, and the internet just changed everything.
Well, I think the big key is that there used to be marketing, there used to be public relations.
Right.
And especially those two. And now you couldn't really tell anybody what the two are. They're one and the same.
Yep.
And they both in some ways get a negative connotation when you're talking about marketing to like consumers.
Right.
Right. So it's almost like you, even if you're in marketing now and you're working at consumers, you have to say, no, I'm not a marketer. I'm a digital strategist.
I'm a digital strategist.
I'm a digital director, I mean, it's weird how that works. Like it's this whole thing that was built, and it's still there completely.
Right.
And there's still marketing in every single company, and they still internally call it that.
Right.
But it's funny how it has turned into this thing where it's like politics has changed.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like authenticity. And that's one of the hardest things to teach.
Yeah,
you can't teach authenticity.
No question about it.
You can teach how to do things, but even teaching how to do things changes continually. So marketing is almost what you make of it. It's like maketing.
It really is. And everything's changed. Data itself has changed, because it's so much more easy to accumulate now. But it's also finding what you really truly need data for,
right?
What you're trying to utilize it and leverage,
Because data was not big originally with marketing, right? It sort of it was art. It was more art. It was like Mad Men.
Yeah.
And then it's now science.
Yep.
But science needs art just as art needs science. So that's figuring out that symbiosis is the toughest piece.
No question about it. Yeah.
It's crazy.
So it's definitely changed a lot, just over the last 25 years. So
how did you know how to get how did you know where to go? You wanted to go somewhere warm and you're leaving. How did you choose?
Right. So I really enjoyed working, I enjoyed that kind of teaching component.
Yeah.
And one thing that I didn't mention about a lot of our family vacations is we'd usually go someplace where we could scuba dive, because everybody but my mom in the family, would go scuba diving. And I decided I wanted to go teach scuba diving for a while.
There you go.
So I went to
Some
Florida.
want to be ski instructors. Some want to be.
Yep, exactly. So I went to Florida and went through getting certified to be a scuba instructor, and then immediately was asked by Club Med, and I'm not sure, that used to be a really everybody knew,
ubiquitous, yeah.
Yeah. And now, they haven't, speaking of marketing, done a great job at marketing to the Americas. But I was asked to go work for Club Med, so I ended up in St. Lucia.
Wow.
And I was down there for a season, and then they transferred me to the Turks and Caicos Islands. And
wow. How did you know you could do this? Like, you guys did it as a family this much that you knew you had an advantage to jump in? Because I imagine just like any business, it was probably absurdly competitive once you started getting into it.
Well, that was the nice thing about landing a job immediately. Yeah. And at the time, there was no shortage of jobs for scuba instructors.
Really?
Not at all.
Oh, wow.
Now I wouldn't have probably opened my own scuba, dive company, because that was, that went from being a guy with, a 6-pack captain's license and a little boat and, some equipment to being, one of those things where, these companies have like 3 or 4 big boats that, carry, 60 divers out to the reef at one time. Wow. And, it's tough to compete with that.
It's not a mom and pop thing anymore.
Not a mom and pop thing. And that's kind of the way that it evolved. I think at this point it's kind of gone back to that small, that small time diver, but you're never gonna. It's hard to make enough money to really live well off of that kind of a business. It's got to be a labor of love.
So were you learning those things then that helped your business career?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think I went and taught diving, and I also started logging my sea time. So because I knew that I wanted to get a captain's license. So I ended up getting a captain's license a few years later and shifted that into a towboat company that had just been purchased. And so I helped run a towboat company down in Florida for a couple of years. And that's really when I started having to think a lot about business and, think a lot about business operations and,
can I make it here? What do I need to do to make it? What was making it in your head?
Oh gosh.
I mean, do you look back at the simplicity of the scuba diving life and go, man, I yearn for that?
It's funny you ask that because at the time, by this time I was 22, 21, 22, and I had it made working at Club Med. I mean, everything's paid for.
You just didn't know it.
And, after a year or so, I was kind of like, I kind of need to get serious about life. I mean, I kind of miss having a power bill and, the things that we dread in life, rent. And, I kind of wanted that normal, kind of that normal life back.
Well, it's called seasonal for a reason. And if you have aspirations if you have aspirations that are bigger, the seasonal things while you're living it are amazing.
Right.
But then it's almost like a hot dog, which I know you had for lunch today. One isn't enough, but 2 is too many.
Right. Yep.
Like burger, it's like that. So it's like,
it's true.
The seasonal jobs are like hot dogs
in
that you're just like, this is the life. But then there's something in the back of your head going, but is it? Are you sure? And if you come back for that second year, the next set of whippersnappers are coming in and they're in the this is life and you're no, it's not. There's much more to life.
Yep.
And the more you keep coming back, you almost are deciding at that point, okay, I guess I'm in this.
Right.
Because there's not really growth.
Yep. Now, did you ever work any seasonal jobs?
When I was in high school, I would work at Cub Scout camps and stuff. But I think my situation that was akin to yours was when I moved to Phoenix for 4 months.
Right.
And I had a lot of those same feelings. I was like, I am in quote unquote paradise, actually Paradise Valley, is the town I lived in.
Yep.
And everything was set up perfectly. You were never at wanting for anything. You had enough money to live working an 18 to 20 hour a week.
Right.
At a burrito place. And everything was covered, your food. And I was fine with eating burrito and then P.F. Chang's every other night because my cousin was a manager at P.F. Chang's. Right. It was easy.
Yeah.
Time was yours.
Yep.
Everything was at your beck and call.
Yep.
But you just knew it's just not sustainable because it's sustainable like this.
Yep.
But if you ever want to move on, get your own place, get your own wife.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have kids.
Right.
It wouldn't work. And not that has to be the thing, but I think when you know, you just know. And unless you're in a lot of those situations, as you probably saw with your seasonal thing, a lot of people are drowning themselves out with things to almost make those thoughts not even come to the surface.
For sure. And you know, in retrospect, both when I was at Club Med and then when I'd come back to the mainland, and I was actually at that point living in the Florida Keys, a lot of the people were middle-aged that were, you know, working these jobs, and it's not that they've been doing it all their life. They literally were coming back to it, or coming, you know, they were, I hate to characterize this, but it's true. They were running from something. Yeah. You know, and I don't know, you know, it really depended on what they were running from, based on what their life experience was.
And you're like, man, they got it. They're with it. They get it. And you're just waiting for the shoe to drop, and they tell you that, like, what happened.
Yes, exactly. And
like The Wrestler, you know, the movie, and it's like, what?
So true. Yeah, so true. And so I think that once I really discovered that is when I don't want to say I was ever disenchanted with that lifestyle, but I learned a lot from it, because I got to meet a lot of people from different backgrounds, different life experiences, and it really taught me that, and I still think this today, if you are a good writer, anybody can write about their life experience, and it could make a bestseller. Yeah. I mean, everybody's unique life experience.
Even if you're bad at the job you're writing about, that almost makes it even better.
Exactly.
Like, look at Michael Lewis.
Yep.
Like, he's made his career as a writer, and he was not a very good investment banker.
Right.
But he made his money because he was the first person to really truly write about investment banking in the authentic way. What was actually happening there, like. How debased the system was.
Yep.
And then you parlay it.
For sure.
Yeah. I think writing and interacting with people the right way. Those are things anybody can pick up. You got to work at it.
Yeah. You definitely have to work at it, I think. But yeah, you know, just trying to articulate something, if people are able to, and some people are great storytellers. I'm not a great storyteller. I wish I was a lot better of a storyteller. But
we'll see what people think here. The downloads will say it. Maybe you're okay.
I don't know. But I do know that if you're a good storyteller, you can articulate how interesting your life is. And I feel bad when, you know, some people don't ever get to tell that story.
Do you think it's because you're not good at embellishing? Don't you think that's a big part of storytelling?
I think it's a huge part of storytelling, but I also think that in a lot of ways, it is painting the picture. Yeah. I have a really good friend of mine who is an architect, and he currently lives in fact, speaking of Arizona, he grew up in Arizona, but he currently lives in Vienna, Austria. And this guy is hands down the best storyteller I've ever heard. And he is the nicest guy. And it's not so much that he embellishes anything. He just knows how to
exalt it
and just find the right inflection and find the right way to just paint the picture. And so you know, the people will sit there and listen to him telling the story, and he just, it's kind of like he's bringing them next to the campfire.
Was your dad a good storyteller?
No, not particularly.
Yeah.
By and large, the Spracklen family are not. They don't like to talk about themselves much.
Well, God, with that many women around, you gotta be careful.
For sure. They don't know how.
You're afraid to.
True.
What did you say you did? I grew up around a high level storyteller, and I saw something very recently. And when you grow up around that, you hear the same story.
Of course.
Forever.
Yeah.
And you hear the way it morphs, which is even more worrisome, because honesty is so important to me. And not that it's dishonesty that's hurting people, but I'm just like, it fascinates me how the brain works in those ways. Like
Right.
we went to spring training a couple months ago. It was the first time we took my son, and it was my dad, my wife, my son, and me. And in the first inning of the first game, my son gets a ball.
Right.
And it was, we were a couple of rows up off of the Mets dugout by third base, and a kid in the front saw my son. He was he was older than my son, but he was a young kid, probably like 8 or something or 10. And he pointed and gave it and basically moved it up the row so that my son could have a ball.
Oh, nice.
Todd Frazier got that kid the ball. So my dad was not watching a lot of this. By this point, the story has now turned into Todd Frazier came off the field, came up, and gave it to my son. And it's like, it's fact now. And you don't want to take it away because he was so excited by being on this trip, and he was so happy, and it's great. And in theory, if A equals B and B equals C, A equals C, and who does it hurt?
Right.
But I was like, wow, my insights make it important for me to be true to the actual events that happened. And I try to be a storyteller within that, or you find your own process of storytelling. But it's funny how that works. And you see it with salespeople. Like you probably saw it in your business time when you're going sales things, and you see the way like a basketball coach or like a circus leader, like P.T. Barnum, they come in and the data you all went over gets exalted, embellished, whatever happened. And you're like, okay, let's just get the business and then we'll pretend they didn't hear what that was. That's like such a big part of sales. Well, and that's what breaks people through to get the big deals.
Exactly. And I couldn't agree more. One thing that I've noticed a pretty consistent trait over most of the CEOs in companies that I've worked with or known is exactly that.
The reality distortion field, as they said with Steve Jobs.
And sometimes I don't know that they recognize it. I think in people that tell good stories in their head, they may forget what the reality is, and it really does become the reality. And in some cases, I wonder if a lot of it isn't also to shorten the story a little bit, because my wife likes to make fun of me that I can drag on a story forever. And it's true, because I'll sit there and take all sorts of left turns, as I've done during this podcast.
That's okay.
But truly, people, that are good storytellers know how to give the right information in the right amount of time, and it's still colorful.
Well, I think it's hard too, because we wouldn't have many of the great advances we do have unless someone didn't at the least embellish in their mind what's possible.
Right.
Because you think of the minds like Elon Musk or Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos, and they pushed well beyond any internal governors that all hold us back and go, that's not possible. This is impossible.
Right.
And I mean, we worked on something like this, and you just sort of have to suspend disbelief somewhere,
right,
and understand, or maybe it's suspend belief. I don't know which one, but somewhere somebody has to not have a governor on them. It's the only way you move forward. Otherwise, you stay within your own parameters, and you never break out. You never leave the seasonal job.
True, and I also think people that are good storytellers tend to maintain a really fun enthusiasm for life.
Yeah.
And that's what, that's why they're fun to be around. That's why, that's why they tend to be a little bit more successful than, other people. I consider myself a bit of an introvert.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's funny. My dad we used to sort of make fun of this thing. I ended up coining it Sunday morning optimism. And in the week, on the Sunday morning, 9 a.m. to noon, it was as optimistic as he is in his entire life.
Right.
And it would almost, when it would come around, you would almost be like, stop it. But also you learn, just like in business, this is the time of our maximum leverage point.
Yes.
This is when we make the plans, when we push through the things we want to get through.
Yep.
Because it's going to be like a reverse Cinderella, and at noon it's gone.
Right.
But it's funny how I think the introverts can observe those things in others, and you almost have to, without being the storyteller, you almost have to weaponize that. Oh, weaponize is a mean word, but you almost have to learn how to leverage that the way they leverage stories.
Yeah.
The details you've held and what you realize when the right thing to do, when the right time to do something is, or any of us who are married understand that.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially introverts.
No question.
So what got you out of South Florida?
Well, I was actually, I was moved by a company that I ended up going to work for in Miami, and I was moved out to Texas, to Houston, Texas.
Wow. Okay.
And I spent about 6 years there, and then was coaxed out to California by some friends that I'd grown up with that had been there for a while and had started a business there, and was in California for 12, 13 years, and then kind of got coaxed out here. So it's been a little bit of everything in Americana, seeing different cultures, different, just different ways of thinking throughout all of those places.
Is it like going to a different country?
In a lot of ways it is. There are marked differences in regional culture in America that I think that a lot of people don't recognize to its fullest.
What is so Miami, Houston,
San
Diego. It's distinct places.
Very.
How, when you assess, almost like being an athlete playing in the different places,
sure.
And it's a nice skip and a jump without going to too bad of a weather environment.
Right.
But like, how are the days different? How is like the way you wake up and you go about your day and go to bed at night? Like what was like amazing about Miami? What was amazing about Houston? And what was amazing about San Diego? And maybe in ways that you never thought.
Yeah. Well, Miami, I have to be honest. Miami was really tough.
Too fast, flashy?
It was too flashy in the sense that you have to really watch your back. Now, I had some really good friends, that I made there. And we all kind of took care of each other. But everybody there it's a hustle. Miami is one big hustle.
Especially when you think of it as the fulcrum of the entire drug trade between South America and North America. And I mean, you've probably seen many of those documentaries like Cocaine Cowboy and all that.
Sure.
And is it just like, oh my God, I lived in that?
Yeah. Yeah. And also the other aspect of it is Miami is so heavily, Cuban.
Yeah.
And so when you think about the plight of, these people that had to all of a sudden flee their home country, and go to a different country, even though it was, 90 miles away.
Yeah, it's crazy. And they can't go back.
Can't go back. Left family and everybody. And here they are in this new country without a dime to their name, with, just the clothing that's on their back. And they had to get inventive, and again, they had to hustle. They had to hustle to be able to, afford to live. And so that's part of that culture. That's just become
transient.
Yeah. But I think that, also within Miami, there's a pretty deep, familial, culture piece as well. Mm-hmm. And, when you need something, you're buying it from your cousin who, runs this particular, thing, and he's buying stuff from you, and, everybody's kind of buying things, or contributing to the economy through that, through that familial piece. And I have to say, while I was there, I was taken in by a couple of, different Cuban families that, I just loved to death, and they were so amazing. And they were what made, that area special for me. But, by and large, I found it really, really, I don't know the proper term for it, just edgy. I just always felt like I was watching my back.
It wasn't like a perfect comfort fit.
There wasn't.
Well, it's like, that's how I feel sometimes with places like Las Vegas.
Oh yeah.
Is that they're meant for you to come in and come out.
Yep, exactly.
And like, if you're going to live there, fine. But the other thing I believe with some of these, and it was all warm weather places you were in, you shouldn't go into something necessarily for the weather.
Right.
Because you take for granted the weather like 1 week into being in a place, right? Like you forget that there's cold going on elsewhere. If you could walk through like a reality field and like step into Wyoming for a minute in the middle of winter.
Oh yeah.
Then you could appreciate it. But because you can't do that,
right,
it just becomes part of the background. So
it's true.
It doesn't. I mean, I'm saying this not having really. I mean, I lived in Phoenix and it was great, but you almost had to be reminded it was great by your family calling and be like, "Oh, it's 9 degrees here," and you go, "Oh, good, yeah, right, okay, it's it's 60 degrees here." Like it doesn't actually tangibly change your life because you would almost have to go like back into it every week to remind yourself. And so because of that, everybody puts so much of an emphasis on that weather thing about moving there. Yep. But it's not the panacea. It's not the be all and end all. Like you have to have, if you have something, like it's maybe 10%, like 90% has to be your life is in good order. Your family's in a good place. You have a great job, because even when we're here, we're in the winter, we're inside a building for the majority of the day. Like the weather it does affect us if we can't get to work, but then we're home.
Right.
Like it should never be in your thinking, right?
No, it's so true. That is so true. Yep.
How have you found moving back, or you've never lived in New Jersey, but now you live in New Jersey, which is crazy. What was it like living in a winter? It probably wasn't as bad as you were even thinking, right?
Well, it wasn't, but you got to, put it in context too, that I spent the first, 19, 20, 21 years of my life in
That's true.
Montana, where there's 6 months of winter.
Yeah. And
I swore I'd never live north of I-10, but I broke that promise coming out here. But, it wasn't that bad. It seemed like it stretched a long time. April out here, I think, from what I understand, was,
this was a bizarre year,
a real bizarre year.
I mean, no, we got 4 nor'easters,
right?
Like in March and April.
Yeah, it was.
That's totally out of
insane. But if it wasn't for that, I would have considered this, just completely mild and completely tolerable.
You just get used to it.
Yeah.
It's funny though. Your skin gets thinner though, doesn't it? Like
it does.
Coming from that.
Yeah, no question about it.
And now, what do you think though? Obviously, I grew up in New Jersey. What do you think coming from these places that are a little more open? I mean, there's cities and stuff, but it's totally different here. I mean, to be in a suburb,
right?
I think you're living in like Princeton area. To be in a suburb and it's that dense, is that like claustrophobic, or does it feel okay?
For me, it feels okay.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know. I don't know if I could live in Manhattan.
Yeah.
I could, definitely work every day in Manhattan.
Yeah.
But there's, I'm an empath. I'm always kind of, feeling everybody and trying to understand, what everybody's up to, and trying to stay kind of situationally aware. And man, that gets really exhausting for if you're too long in the city. So I'm so used to seeing big sky everywhere that I've lived that, to be in Manhattan and not be able to see much of the sky, just doesn't feel good. But one thing that I love about everything out here is I love the transportation.
Oh yeah.
I love to be able to take a train to work. I love to have that option. I love all of the different options to be able to get from point A to point B. And, obviously it's a necessity to have this many people in such a concentrated area. You've got to have that. But, yeah, I mean, to me, that's one thing that certainly, Texas doesn't have. And Southern California really doesn't either.
Yeah. Houston's sprawl is unbelievable.
Oh, it's insane. Yeah. I mean, it literally takes, and I lived there 10 years ago, and it would take an hour, close to an hour and a half to get from one side of Houston to the other in normal traffic.
Oh, what was your favorite part of Houston, though?
Oh, the people.
The people.
The people. I loved Texas, and I loved the people there. And if you've never lived in Texas, a lot of people have this impression of just like stupid white people.
Yeah.
And that wasn't my experience at all. Now, I lived near where NASA, near Johnson Space Center. There's a lot of, transplants that.
It's almost like Zurich.
Yeah.
Parts of Houston.
Yeah.
With all the business that's there and how people come to work there.
But I, most of my friends were native Texans, and they were proud, very proud people.
Oh, yeah.
But they were so nice and nice to everybody. It wasn't this racist redneck. Maybe it was me, and maybe I had blinders on, but I didn't know anybody who had anything racist to say about anybody. Or maybe they just wouldn't say anything around me. I don't know.
Now, were you, because I felt that way too, was there a lot of ethnicities around, or was it mostly?
No, it was definitely cultural diverse, and particularly where I was because of NASA.
Yeah.
And, you have engineers from all over the world and all over the United States, and, very, very culturally diverse.
One of the things I thought was very strange when I came back from Phoenix, I had to kind of come back in the cover of night because of how things went. And I had a friend who flew out to Phoenix to drive back with me.
Oh, wow.
And he's Haitian, so he's black.
Right.
And I was always of the mind, the country's, good.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Right.
People are great. And they were. When I'm around,
right,
I was shocked. And this was going from Phoenix all the way back to New Jersey. I was shocked in almost every place we stopped. What the presence of a black person did to the situation. I was completely blown away by this.
Well, I think that highlights a lot of what what we're seeing, develop right now in today's day and age in these plights for everybody to better understand what it's really like for a minority
or a female
because
like in our vantage, and it's not saying it's like white privilege or anything. In our vantage, we're not seeing necessarily people act a certain way.
Right.
But maybe because they're not put in contact with it while in your vantage, Right. And that whole thing that I saw on that trip made me almost change what I thought. Because I'm like, oh yeah, I'm an equal person with the sexes and all this. But it's crazy with all the stuff that comes out, both from race and with the sex stuff, how much while you're not taking part in that society, it's crazy how much it is. And then you're sort of like, well, what do I do?
Yeah, no. And I think that is, that's what we're seeing, and where I think this, this conversation, this national conversation, so to speak, is going to go, where, we are starting to think about what are the solutions, what are the real solutions? What are the practical solutions? I mean, if we don't see it, then it's difficult for us to shame somebody, for doing it.
Yep.
But, maybe just having the conversation and understanding that it, being tipped off to be looking in, at these other aspects that we would have never looked at before, I think is healthy, because then we're actually probably seeing it more than we ever did.
When you had a father in law enforcement, I think, like you, I grew up, if you're pulled over, nothing to worry about.
Right.
I'm not doing anything, nothing to worry about.
Maybe I was speeding, give me a speeding ticket.
Yeah. I couldn't believe the way the thing over the last few years came about where a black person is pulled over and the things go completely wrong without doing stuff. And you're like, oh my God, that's something when we got pulled over, we were the ones who were nervous about a cop pulling us over.
Right.
Not that we're going to get shot or killed.
No.
And it was always like when they pull you over, you're like, oh, let me get my license and all this stuff. So it's right here, you know, because you don't want to be doing stuff with your hands. I mean,
and I still believe that the vast majority of law enforcement officers are good.
Yeah.
And it's the few that make really poor decisions, and they shouldn't be in that job to begin with. Yep. And they really ruin it. But, having said that, when you are a minority, you don't know what you're going to get. And, yep. I can now understand, how just nervous and nerve-wracking that situation would be. And, as human beings, everybody deals with those situations in different ways. And sometimes those ways end up, escalating into, things beyond anybody's imagination. And the real, I guess, eye-opening thing for me is that we're hearing about it a lot more now, but it's probably happening a lot less than it did before this time. Yeah. And that's not something that I ever thought about. Like it just wasn't something that, so, shame on me, but I think that's I think that's where this national conversation is headed. And I think it's, I definitely think it's healthy.
The final thing I wanted to say, because we'll have to do another one at some point before people come looking for us, but on your point about not thinking you could live in New York City, there was something that really surprised me about living in New York City in general, because I had the same thought. I'm like, oh my God, you're just one person in the middle of just nothing.
An ant farm.
Yeah, just you have no idea who this is, who that is. So I went to college at NYU, and I lived there for 1 year. It's insane. Like NYU, which is kind of a sprawling campus, if you call it that, because it's just Greenwich Village for the most part, and they have dorms in disparate places all over there. So in some ways you were shocked at how much you were like, I'm in New York City. This is just open. And then you're like, I'm walking for like 10 blocks. I know every single person I've walked by. Yeah. It's really weird when you move there, just like when you move anywhere, like to your town, you get to know your neighbors, you get to know, and how much it shrinks the place a little bit because now you know people. Another thing, I went to go do an interview last Labor Day, not this, like 2 years ago, Labor Day, with this guy who wrote a really good book on Bill Parcells, and the guy was Sports Illustrated, all this really cool guy. And I went to his apartment to do the interview, and he's at Columbus Circle, and he met me, and we're walking around Columbus Circle, and you just think this is just as open as it is in New York because it's right by Central Park. Nobody knows anything. We're walking, he knows everybody. He's like the mayor. Yeah. He's like, oh, hey, I was looking at you. I was talking to you the other day. And you go, wow, wherever you are, wherever you go, there you are.
It's
you
amazing.
Always will.
Yeah.
So I actually think you could, because I think you would just become very social with the people around you. You have all the people on your floor, wherever you're living. You have the people in your building, and all of a sudden it just grows. Your coffee place. You're around 2 or 3 blocks maybe,
and you have your routine.
Yeah.
And you have your routine. And I mean, even just after a few months of commuting here into Newark, I have a bit of a routine, and now I've started to meet, people that are kind of on the same routine and, say hi to people and just
they're all the same people.
It's
bizarre how commuting works.
Yep. That's true.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
It's insane.
Yep.
So, all right. Well, we can pick this up again at another point.
Sure.
This was good. How long do you think it was?
I don't know. We had to have been an hour.
Hour 25. hour 20.
Oh gosh,
Is that crazy?
that's insane.
Wasn't so bad.
No,
Thanks, bud.
too bad.